Some become scavengers, living off what strangers leave behind. And others still, as we will soon see, would prefer to be simply left alone.
Another Crab's Treasure takes its title from the old saying, "One man's trash is another man's treasure," just with crabs instead of people. Released in April of 2024, Another Crab's Treasure was developed and published by Aggro Crab for the PlayStation 5, the PC, the Nintendo Switch, and the Xbox. I played it on the Xbox Series X through Game Pass where, as of the writing of this review, it's still available on both console and PC. This review seeks to answer the question, is Another Crab's Treasure worth playing? As always, thanks for watching, and if you're enjoying the content, make sure to like and subscribe. Let's begin with an overview of the gameplay. You play as Krill, a hermit crab that is looking for his stolen shell. Another Crab's Treasure is a Souls-like with an emphasis on collecting new shells that each have their own abilities and durability stats. There are over 60 different shells to collect, each with unique mechanics and uses. Most of the shells are pieces of trash that Krill picks up from the ocean, like trophies or soda cans or bottle caps. They come in 3 different sizes ranging from small, medium, and large. The larger the shell, the heavier and more durable it is, but the slower Krill moves. Each shell has a limited amount of durability, indicated by a blue bar over Krill's health. Take a hit, you lose some durability. Once you run out, the shell is destroyed and you need to pick up a new one. If you're lacking a shell, Krill is vulnerable, taking more damage, and he's unable to block. The shells have unique magical abilities called umami. Soda cans can fizz, pushing enemies back and striking them with bubbles. Ink cartridges cover the seawater in ink, obscuring you from sight. There are dozens of different abilities, although they are shared across multiple shells. To match your shell is Krill's weapon, a rusty fork that he picks up near the beginning of the game. It can be upgraded similar to a Souls game, using steel relics found throughout the world. These relics are old keys that you trade into a blacksmith for an upgrade that increases your attack stat. But unlike a Souls game, Krill only has a single weapon. There is no switching it out like you can with your shells. Krill also has a hook, something that he can toss at enemies to pull them close, or hook into the nets to cross gaps. Finally, a Souls-like wouldn't be complete without talking about an upgrade system. After killing enemies, Krill collects microplastics to upgrade himself at various moon snail shells, placed around the world like bonfires from Dark Souls. He can enhance his attack, his vitality, magic, and shell durability. If you want to swap out a playstyle, you can refund them using items purchased from a vendor or found out in the world. Another Crab's Treasure is a fairly linear game with several large, open areas to explore. It's littered with enemies to fight and treasures to find. Most of the collectibles can be sold at the shops for microplastics, but there are several that enhance Krill's health, or increase the number of hooks he can hold, or give him stowaways. These stowaways are enhancements to Krill's abilities, similar to rings or talismans in other Souls-like. There's a limit to how many he can have at a time, but additional capacity can be purchased from microplastics from a vendor in town. Overall, combat is alright, but nothing special. It can be really floaty at times, with the dodge not being super effective. Blocking is definitely preferred over any other action, with Krill poking enemies in between blocks. With the lack of customization of weapons and the lack of different loadouts, combat can get repetitive and boring, especially towards the end of the game. Unlike Elden Ring or Dark Souls where you can swap weapons and play a different way to keep things fresh, Another Crab's Treasure really only has one playstyle. If you aren't feeling it at the start, don't expect it to change in the late game.
Hey, I don't know if you noticed, but your guards are going nuts out there!
Oh, Clontre, little hermit. Our minds are clear as crystal now.
Oh, shuck.
I once thought my duchy quite beautiful, you know, worth preserving. But compared to the reefs, it's a shameful, transient thing, destined to wash away. That's why I'm having them tear it down.
Difficulty can be hard to judge in a Souls-like, pardon the pun. Another crab's treasure is hard for sure, but not punishingly so. There are multiple difficulty options that can be toggled on and off at any time. Things like reduced damage, enhanced attack damage against enemies. You can even give Kirill a gun that can one-shot any enemy if you just want to know the story without playing it. On standard difficulty, you will run into some roadblocks on your progress. This usually means that you're either underleveled or under-equipped. You can overcome a lot of these roadblocks by being really good at the game, but it's often easier to just leave that area and come back later after exploring a bit more. There does come a point in the game where, if you explored and did a lot of the side stuff, you will be cruising through the game pretty quickly because the bosses can't stand up against you. But another crab's treasure has a few artificial difficulty factors added in, namely unblockable attacks, gangs of trash mobs that surround you, or long-range attackers that knock you off ledges. The developers really took a page out of Dark Souls 1 and 2 for the more frustrating parts. But thankfully, if things get too hard for you, you can always dial down the difficulty. It does suck that the bosses can be in arenas that you can't leave, forcing you to replay sections of the game over and over again with your current loadout if you don't want to lose a lot of progress by going back. Especially near the end of the game, there comes a point where you essentially locked into an area, and what upgrades you have is what you get.
I'd hope it would go without saying that the duty of such a dangerous excavation would fall to the Shellfish Corporation. That would be safest for all involved. Don't you agree?
Yeah, we hear you, Roland. No problem.
Then, as Shellfish Corp's CEO and this fair city's de facto mayor, I suppose no one would have any objections to my taking sole control of this treasure hunt. Are we all in agreement?
Graphically, another crab's treasure looks good, but it's the art direction and environments that make it truly unique. The levels are all based on undersea locations, filled with trash or other objects used in cunning ways that make it look like the creatures here built their entire civilization out of another's leftovers. The game runs at a steady 60 FPS unless you're loading into a new area. Then there are massive slowdowns. Thankfully, you're usually not in combat or doing tricky traversal sections at times like this. It's obvious that the game is loading a new section of the map in these places, and that would be fine if you didn't have to repeatedly enter those places after dying. For example, there is one part where you're going to be dying a lot trying to get past this tricky section filled with enemies. You'll die and get sent back to the moon snail shell to try again, but you need to load the map again, meaning the performance tanks for a few seconds every time you do an attempt. There are other spots where you will die and have to skip the cinematics for a boss every time you enter the arena. It's not onerous, but it is a few second delay each time. In Dark Souls, the boss would just be waiting on the other side of this fog wall without a cinematic because the game devs expected you to die. But here, you enter the arena, performance tanks for a second as it loads, the cinematic plays, you skip it after a second, and then the battle starts. It damages the flow of combat, putting you off pace for when the battle starts. I also encountered a few bugs, particularly involving the sound. The voices would suddenly stop working, requiring a reload of the game. It was very noticeable at times where Krill wouldn't be speaking during cutscenes or when in combat, making the last battle of the game very silent, and the ending cinematic lacking any narration, requiring me to read the subtitles.
Go away! No one's home!
Sir, please open up.
Oh, you're not a bird.
Sir, are you the owner of this residence?
You mean my shell? Yeah, it's mine. Do you like it?
I represent the Royal Duchy of Slacktide, which has recently annexed the territory surrounding and including this tide pool. I'm here to inform you that you have outstanding taxes that date back in upwards of 10 tides. If you are presently unable to pay this balance, the duchy will claim you home until you...
Hold on, I've got some questions.
Alright, the setting is the best part of Another Crab's Treasure. It takes place underwater in a part of the ocean that is dealing with trash and microplastics ruining the environment. The creatures here scrounge and use this trash, and have even built numerous industries off of its collection. You play as Krill, a hermit crab who is living in the remote tide pools and is apparently behind on his taxes. A loan shark comes, demands payment, and takes his shell when Krill can't pay. That leads to Krill traveling the sea looking for the person who took his shell. The Duchess, the ruler of Krill's part of the ocean, is trying to build a beautiful palace, and Krill's shell is given to her as taxes. To get it back, he has to do some work for her. Unfortunately, when Krill performs his duties, the Duchess and her people are infected by the gunk, which is essentially the pollution that's turning the sea life into mindless monsters. Krill kills the infected Duchess and has to chase after the shark again who sold his shell to a trader in a city. The trader won't give it back without a lot of money, and Krill is incredibly poor. So he has to find something to trade, and luckily, a treasure map falls from the sky. That's pretty much the story in a nutshell. It can be pretty fun and takes Krill across the ocean to a variety of different locations, each unique and very trashy. The art direction and environment are the best part of Another Crab's Treasure, with each place making use of trash in cunning and clever ways.
I would be remiss as a local business leader if I didn't punish y'all for this little indiscretion. I dare say that not a single one of y'all...
Shut up! I've been working my butt off trying to get my old life back! I'm pretty sure I've been working harder than anyone else!
And that brings us to the conclusion of another review. Here, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of the pros and cons of Another Crab's Treasure, along with my final thoughts. For the pros, the environments are creative and clever. The game has a good story with lots of interesting characters. There are a lot of variety to the shells you can collect. You can expect about 15 hours of content, which is good value for the $20 to $30 price tag, depending on the region you live in and the console you're playing on. Difficulty options are available for all types of players. For the cons, combat isn't great, it's merely serviceable. There isn't a lot of choices in playstyle. I don't think you can do an all magic build, I don't think it would be viable. It can get a bit repetitive and boring at times. Technical issues are still present, like stuttering during loading and audio drops. My final verdict is, if you're looking for a Souls-like to play, give Another Crab's Treasure a look. It's good value for the price, especially if you play it through Game Pass. Thanks for watching, I'm the Casual Console Gamer, and I'll see you all in the next review.